Good evening and welcome to the 9th Inside Government Show for the fall 2020 semester here at Cayuga Community College and broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon Fios, the Auburn Regional Media Access, better known as ARMA, as well as Win 89.1, the college's radio station. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. If you're just tuning in to our shows after the forums, you will know that due to COVID-19 and the pandemic, we've changed a bit of our filming process since March. With new health protocols and SUNY directives, we are doing one show per taping versus both an Inside Government and Beyond the Front Page is back-to-back each Tuesday and Thursday. We're taping on both days, but only one show per day, and this also includes only one guest in the studio at a time, where we used to be able to take 2 or 3. A reminder, this show is directed by our students, produced by our students, they tape these shows. We've front-loaded the schedule this season to start in September rather than at the end of October, or excuse me, end of September, early October. And then instead of going to December and ending with Santa Claus the week after Thanksgiving, we're going to finish next week after Election Day. There'll be more about what our shows are next week in just a few minutes after we talk to our first guest today. Tonight we are bringing you the first of what we hope will be 2 back-to-back exit interviews of sorts with members of the New York State Legislature who are retiring after decades, and that is right, decades of service in Albany. Combined, they have served in the legislature more than 50 years. Next week, we hope to bring you New York State Senator James Seward, who first started serving Cayuga County in 1987. But tonight, we are delighted to have with us Assemblyman Gary D. Finch, who has had a seat in the legislature representing Cayuga County since the special election, I think in 1999, and he decided this year not to seek re-election. He has served the public in a number of capacities over the years and decades, not only as a member of the legislature, but he was the mayor of Aurora, a member of the board of trustees of this college for many, many years, and he was the head of the United Way. He lives in Union Springs with his wife Marcia of 53 years, which is remarkable in itself as well. The 126th Assembly District includes the city of Auburn, the southern part of Cayuga County, parts of Onondaga County, Cortland County, and Shenango. On Tuesday, we gave you the 2 individuals who want to succeed him, Dia Carbajal and John Lamondes, who are on the ballot on Tuesday. But we are delighted to have in the studio, as I said, the Assemblyman. Welcome back to Inside Government. I guess we should say as a precursor about talking, for a long shot, people most likely will know that you are in a chair because you have blown out your knee.
Blown out and had a septic knee twice.
So how are you feeling?
I'm feeling great, other than the fact that I'm going to rehab and trying to get my knee back in shape so I can walk. It's a pleasure to be here, Guy. It always is. I enjoy coming to this college. Of course, you mentioned I was on the board of trustees, and
now, you were the president of the board of trustees for how many years?
For 3 years, I was president.
So I want to get into why you're not seeking re-election, but let's talk about public service right now. You did the United Way, and if I remember correctly, you headed the campaign on doing that. How did you get involved in public service?
I've always had an interest. I guess it's just I always wanted to. As you know, I'm a funeral director, and you work with people at the worst times of their lives. Really, as you know, we both lost our mothers in the last 20 years. Since I've been in the assembly, a number of things have happened. And I think it was a natural progression from there to United Way and involvement in the community and eventually mayor of Aurora and an interest in government in the assembly.
So you've had a lot of young people come through your office. I'm still going to consider him young. He's up in the control room. Pat Cameron, who's a great young guy who works for you. But you have had a lot of young people who've come through.
Right.
I think Chrissy and we can go through a whole list of people. What do you tell young people who want to get involved? How should they do it?
Well, one of the things I enjoy the most is speaking to young people, speaking to classes. And what I usually tell them is somewhere deep inside of all of us, we have a goal or a dream that's there. Sometimes we don't even tell anybody about it. We think maybe they'll laugh at us or they'll make fun of us. But this is really what we want. And so many times we overlook it and we do something else that our parents may encourage us to do, or follow the one that's deeply inside your heart or your gut, so to speak. And you'll be happy, and you'll be successful, and set a goal, and make them lofty. I believe in that. Nothing worse than to get to the end toward the end of your life and realize your goals, you didn't set a high enough goal. So
do you think you've reached your goals?
No, I don't. I really don't.
So you think you have, I'm skipping all over the place here.
I know we have. No, I really don't think I have. But
you've done 21 years in the legislature, which is a remarkable time.
In fact, Guy, I'm the longest serving member of the legislature from Cayuga County.
In history?
In history, since 1799. And there may not be another one for another 100 years, who knows, the way they gerrymander the districts as it is. But Guy, before we even go any farther, I've got a question for you. I'm going to turn this around a minute.
You and J.D. Pavis, go ahead.
I want to know, and this should trigger something in your mind. What's the last book you read?
The last book I've read, so I am just finished The Heirs to the Founders by H.W. Brands, and it does because you were asked the question. And I remember it was a tree grows in. It was David Figueroa was sitting right here. It was a tree grows in Brooklyn. He totally threw you off. And this was, I think, the first forum. This is when the Post and the Citizen both. The world has changed. There's one newspaper now that really has a bureau here or has an office here, and it's H.W. Brands. It's about Calhoun Clay and Daniel Webster, who I think is a wonderful study. And so and I will say I have also been reading, as you know, because your wife has been so delightful to our family. We have an 8-year-old, so I've also read the Lunch Lady series of graphics. So I'm going the full panoply. So why did you decide that you weren't going to seek re-election?
Actually, I just knew it was time to leave. I broke my ankle. That started a whole series of problems. This was your
fridge accident. You were reaching to get a snack in the fridge.
In the refrigerator.
And you broke your ankle.
And slipped and broke an ankle, and that created a problem that never got quite repaired quite right.
So it's been this cascade of...
And then there was, right from there, they gave me, because of the swelling, they gave me a drug called Lasix, which removes swelling but also creates other problems, including damaging your kidneys and obviously triggering sepsis in your knee. So that's really what happened. And that happened, and it was probably time to leave, I think, after all these years, but I truly loved every minute of it.
So did you give some thought? I know there'll be redistricting in another 2 years, and as you just said, gerrymandering. That's a nice way of saying it. You just didn't want to wait till that time. You just wanted to.
The way the lines are drawn, I would have survived it. I believe I would have survived the gerrymandering.
And you don't regret making this decision in the spring at all? You're moving forward with what you want to do?
I don't know what I want to do now. I certainly, no, I don't regret the decision. I think it was a wise decision. It was in the best interest of the people that I serve, and that's important. But I don't know what I would like to do, but I certainly don't want to sit home and do nothing.
So, again, 21 years in the
And
legislature.
by the way, before we end the book story, my last book was It Happened in the Room with John Bolton.
Okay. Yeah, so a good friend of mine sent me that. That's a little bit, somebody would say the heirs to the founders is deep, but that's a really, a good friend of mine sent me that, and that's been a slog. It's been interesting, but it's a slog.
I know it.
So, proudest moment in the legislature? What do you look back and say, this was I really did something really important and well in the legislature?
Well, other than the fact of showing up, which is important,
Right.
I think I had an influence on, there was an anhydrous ammonia bill that was passed that John Lamphere, when he was in the sheriff's department, who is now, I believe, teaches at this
He is a
college.
professor does our history.
There was, during the methamphetamine plague that we had before this terrible opiate one we have now, they raised the level of the theft of anhydrous ammonia.
Do you think that's the
That's
best piece of legislation you've been associated with?
It was because it was hard to get through. It was a statewide piece of legislation, and because of being in the minority and the way they run the legislature, I had to give it to a member of the majority to get it passed. And Bill McGee was the one that put his name on it and passed it. So there was that piece of legislation. There was also a veterans bill that we put out quite recently that provided free tuition and free college, the whole shebang, to a child or dependent of someone killed while they were in the service. That was probably the most significant one. There's been multiple legislation I've co-sponsored.
Is there anything you wish you had been able to accomplish in the legislature that you weren't able to get done, whether it because of party registration or you just couldn't get the support of? Are there, that's less of a regret issue. Is there something you really wish you could have passed through that you really tried and just not everything fell into place?
I think to answer that question and try to be specific is difficult. I spent an enormous amount of time trying to get money and funds for our lakes. To me, that was the most important thing that we had to deal with. I have 4 lakes, of the 4 Finger Lakes: Atisco, Skinny-Atlas, Cayuga, and of course Owasco Lake. And it's been a battle over the years to get money to do research on those lakes. Owasco Lake, we've been pretty successful. There's more science on Owasco than any other, and I think you know that.
Professor Halfman and the Finger Lakes Institute. And
they've done a great job, but to get funding for it has been difficult. And there's $65 million set aside, but to get the governor to release that money for these lakes has not been easy. And I think that's something that I've tried to do, work with the local AULA organization, and we've been moderately successful. I also was able to bring the farming community and ALA together, and that's been somewhat successful. They
could have acted like the
They,
Hatfields.
there's always, if there's an adversarial situation, but Ray Lockwood has been very helpful in bringing them together so there's a dialogue.
What will you miss most about your tenure in the legislature?
I think I'll miss the sense of being part of history. And I've been fascinated with that. And I think you probably are as well, to play a small, minuscule part of New York State history, and being part of that has been very significant. And the people I've met over the years, and I met some, wonderful, wonderful people.
So you've served with 4 governors. I say that with because the legislature, despite what we might think right now, is a co-equal branch with the governor. We might get to that.
It's supposed to be that way.
So you've had Governor Pataki, who I know was a good friend of yours.
Yes.
You had Governor Spitzer, Governor Patterson, and you obviously have Governor Cuomo.
Right.
To me, the obvious answer is George Pataki, because you were both in the same party. But who was easiest to work with?
Well, certainly George Pataki was easiest. You could pick up the phone. You not necessarily get a hold of the governor, but you could certainly get someone in the governor's office or any one of the commissions, and they were easy to speak to. They took your phone call. It's a very partisan place, Albany, and it almost, it's almost like if you're Republican and you're in the minority, it's a little harder to get through the maze than it is if you're a majority member. But
so who's been the most difficult governor to work with?
Well, certainly I think the current governor's been the most difficult because he's usurped the power of the legislature and taken over. The legislature has actually given him an inordinate amount of power because of the COVID epidemic. And I think we made a mistake doing that. I think we'll pay for it in the end because under the guise of the COVID, we've lost other power as well. Much of the law right now is being done through executive authority. And
so separating out the powers issue for a second, do you think the governor's done a good job in the way he's handled COVID? Forget the who can make decisions. Obviously, somebody did make decisions from, let's say, March 13th through now.
Right.
And we've asked this of every guest who's been in here since, the September. How has the governor done?
I think the governor has done well on COVID. I think he's done remarkably well. He should be given good points for that. I'd give him certainly an A.
And so there's been some criticism, and mainly that's with forums, as you've participated in enough forums here.
Right.
I think most likely 6 or 7 over the many years, because you did not have opponents in some cases. But there is this issue of nursing homes and how, we talked about this because of your knee.
Right.
You've got to have some rehab, and how nursing homes have been handled. Do you think the legislature, first of all, do you think it was handled well? And more importantly, do you think the legislature will have to do a little bit more digging on that issue?
Well, I think there was multiple deaths in those nursing homes. And I think it was probably one death is too many, of course. But I think no one really knew how to handle this COVID epidemic when it first hit, even though we were clearly warned about it. So I think the governor learned from that experience. And the very fact that he put limits on businesses, even though the economic community certainly needs that, I think in the long run it will pay off. I mean, he had a disaster going on in New York City with COVID. I mean, there weren't enough funeral directors.
Right.
To serve the problems that in New York. They had to go out of state and give temporary licenses to funeral directors to come in. I mean, so I think the governor has done a good job on that line. In other areas, spending is out of control.
So you started the year, well, let me finish off with COVID first, because I do want to ask you some general questions. You are one of those rare Republicans now, and I think we saw it earlier in the summer when you wrote a letter about Andrew Dennison,
Yes.
who's a fellow Republican,
Yes.
criticizing his comments in regards to the Black Lives Matter issue.
Exactly.
We'll get to that in a second, but you have not pulled punches in those particular cases. How is the White House, as far as you're concerned, responded to COVID compared to, say, Albany?
Well, first of all, I'm a state official. So to comment on that right now is, in the midst of this, I would say, contentious election, I don't think that the president is entirely responsible for the COVID epidemic. I think there's a lot of that has been part of the campaign that's going on. But certainly they could have done better.
So there are three things that maybe the legislature, you're not sure if you'll go back. I know the governor has said that, so back in April, there was a $14.5 billion, that's with a B, hole.
Right.
Am I correct on that?
Yes.
You started the fiscal year that way.
Yes.
You have any idea what it is now?
It's greater than anything. It's probably, it has to be something in the $22 billion range.
So
almost as much as our school, the amount of money we give to our schools.
So with that being said, the legislature has ceded powers to, and you said that was something that you wish had come back to the legislature. You think the legislature will go back, because the governor was very clear, I think this was about 3 weeks ago, said not making any decisions until after Election Day. Do you think the governor will make those decisions if he can, or do you think the legislature will go back in late November? Because some of these elections aren't going to be known until
Right.
who knows when.
I think the governor will end up calling us back.
You do, okay. So there are three things that the legislature could act on. One would be, and I know he announced yesterday he will leave it up to localities, a mask ban. So you came in here, we had your temperature taken and everything, we have protocols here. Do you think it is time for New York to discuss having a permanent mask policy, at least on state property?
I do. I think that's probably the only thing right now that's keeping us safe.
So I was surprised. Kathleen Cuddy, who you know very well, has been here a couple of times. I know she does not always like coming on television to talk about health policy, but she does a great job. She'll be here in a week. But I was surprised that we don't have a requirement to have students vaccinated for the flu. So forget COVID for a second. Should there be a policy for flu, especially when it comes into contact with, when we can't tell the difference sometimes between COVID and the flu, for a statewide vaccine policy where every student should get it, like they do for
measles?
Right, for those others?
I have not given that really any thought, to tell you the truth. But I do know that there are many people out there that are concerned over those vaccines and how they're made up, and the possibility of autism being a
Right. So
issue.
So you wouldn't necessarily be supportive of a
I wouldn't
vaccine mandate until they
I would not
tried and
on a
tested.
mandate.
Okay.
Not on a mandate.
We've mentioned Mr. Dennison. I shouldn't have left it hanging there like a.
By the way, you mentioned Dr. Cuddy, and she's done an outstanding job.
Yes.
At Wells College alone, she sent down, I think, like 3,000 test kits for them to use down there. So she's been great responding to the needs of the community. She really has.
So I mentioned Mr. Dennison. What brought you about to write a letter about his comments? I left it hanging out there, and I should close it out.
You do. I was immensely impressed with Sean Butler, the chief of police, as well as Brian Gank, the sheriff, and how they handled the protests that they had here in the city of Auburn in reference to the deaths of the shooting deaths of black men. Mr. Ford, I believe, was the last.
There have been
One,
multiple.
but he was the one that really triggered the whole thing. They handled it extremely well. And Mr. Dennison, on the other hand, wrote a scathing letter to the paper at a time when it really was added fuel to the fire. I thought it was inappropriate, and I thought it was about time someone said something, spoke up. So I simply wrote a letter to the citizen.
So it was more like a Nixon goes to China, the one guy who could say something as a fellow Republican?
Well, maybe you could put it that way, I guess. But I don't know how much of a Republican Mr. Dennison was anyway. He certainly isn't one now.
Oh, so has he changed his party registration?
Yeah, I believe he's independent.
Did you take any flack from Republicans on that letter?
Not a thing, none.
I know we're closing out on 30 minutes. I do want to ask about two things, and one of them is related not necessarily to Mr. Dennison, but the whole issue of civility. So the world has changed since you first got elected in 1999. How long were you mayor of Aurora?
For 8 years.
So almost close to 30 years, you've seen the world go from, at least this local world, to newspapers who had an office and a bureau here. We've gone from, television and radio to Zoom and Twitter.
Right.
Has the world become less civil in your mind?
Oh, much so, much more so.
And how do we get back to civility? I guess that's my question.
Like everything begins at the top. It really does. And we need frankly, we need a president who can inspire this nation. And this is what we're desperately needing right now. And we have not got one.
So either whether you thought of a Kennedy or a Reagan, it would take both.
Right, and you named,
Roosevelt or a Roosevelt.
And you mentioned two names exactly. Kennedy or Reagan, both were able to do that. And I think that could help bring us together. And we need to be brought together. The right and the left extremes seem to be the ones that are dictating what's going on. And we can't govern from either right or left to those extremes. You and I both know, Guy.
The middle's the
The
mark.
middle is where you've got to be. Maybe slightly right, slightly left, but beyond that, It just does not work.
So 2 final questions. Well, one's a question, one's to let you have your final say. So the last question for you is, what do you plan, I'm assuming you're not going to miss the drives on Sunday nights or Monday mornings to Albany.
Right.
But what do you plan to do after January? You're not going to disappear from the public space. What do you hope to do come January? Besides get your knee better.
I really don't know. And I've been thinking about it quite a bit. And talked about it to Marcia, who, my wife. Certainly, it's my identity, and it's become, and so and it will change immensely. It's already changing, but by the 31st of December, it will be gone. So I don't know what I'll be doing, but I know I can't sit home. I can't
Well, she doesn't want you
work.
either.
No, I'm sure not. And I can't build model boats.
Right.
So I've got to do something. I think I believe I have something to give, but I'm not exactly sure in what direction.
So finally, and I'll let you have as much time as you want, is there anything, there's the camera that's looking at you, is there anything you want to say to the public before we end this interview about your service?
I would have to encourage anyone to run for office and serve, whether on the school board or on the county ledge, or certainly in the legislature. I know we need more women. It's one thing we desperately need. We need to have more women involved in government, in the legislature. I think that the county legislature has 3 women on it now, which is remarkable. We need to have more in the county, in the state legislature. That's important. And the very fact that I appreciate everyone who had voted for me, and I appreciate the fact that there were many people who didn't vote, but I tried to represent every one of them. Whether they were Democrat or Republican, I never asked that question, ever. We've responded to all their needs, and I've literally loved every minute of it. There were some bad days, but I still love those as well. So those things were very important. I'm not exaggerating when I say I would have paid to be there. It was such a great experience, and it was just one more step from the United Way to doing something else. I've always enjoyed public service, and Guy, in many ways, you're the same way. You yourself have always enjoyed that.
Well, we hope you get better. There's always a job as a book reviewer, because I do know you like to read. So maybe not The Tree Grows in Brooklyn.
No, but my favorite book, my most favorite book of all of them, is The Night Before Christmas.
Well, we're almost there, by the way. So we do want to thank you, and we hope your knee gets better. We do appreciate you making the time for doing this. It's a busy season, I know, out there. But we do wish you well, and your wife, Marcia, who is just a delightful woman. And
yes, she has. She's truly...
You're very lucky,
yes,
as I am. So as Wells women.
They are. You're absolutely right.
No disrespect to Cuga, but Wells women, the mind did go to Cuga as well. So we do want to thank Assemblyman Gary D. Finch for giving us this update, not only on what's going on in Albany, but his career in public service, and do want to wish him well on that. Next Tuesday, we'll be back with Auburn Superintendent of Schools Jeff Perazzolo, who will give us a district update that will include the discussion about the phased-in reopening during COVID-19. That will also include a discussion about the students who have tested positive at Casey Park Elementary School. And we'll also talk about the district's financial outlook, especially with the state of New York and what is out there. We do hope to bring you still next week Senator Seward. We talked about he is ending his career as a state senator. He decided not to seek re-election, having represented Cuyahoga County in the Senate on or off for 34 years. Next Thursday is our final show for fall 2020 with Cuyahoga County Public Health Director Kathleen Cuddy, who will give us a final COVID-19 update for 2020. Before we go, though, we would like to let you know that you can give us your ideas for questions for any of those guests at Inside Government or Beyond the Front Page. We are looking to return on January 25th that week. You can send us your ideas for questions or guests to cozguytho@aol.com or Inside Government, 141 Dunning Avenue, Auburn, New York, 13021. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cuyahoga Community College. We want to thank you for watching. Have a great night, a terrific tomorrow, and we hope to see you back here in the studio on Tuesday, Election Day.